Welcome back, guys, and we will be continuing with our discussion on our first lesson, which is the figurative language or the figures of speech. So the first thing that I want you to know is that figurative language must be used and understood imaginatively and not literally. Minsan, we commonly associate things to inanimate objects, or we compare things to animals or to trees, to plants, and etc. and etc. Those are just examples of figures of speech, and now we will tackle them one by one. Okay, so this figurative language is mainly composed of tropes and figures of speech. There are several figures of speech. The most commonly used, or the things that we already have, maybe you already have known, are the simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, personification, apostrophe, hyperbole, alliteration, synecdoche, metonymy, oxymoron, and paradox. So we have a lot, but we will cut the discussion here for two parts so that we can easily understand the differences and how each figure of speech is being used. Okay, so I want you to remember that this figurative language must be used and must be understood imaginatively and not literally. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng mga ginagamit natin ng mga figures of speech or figurative language ay hindi siya nangangahulugan ng saktong define or pagkakabigay ng kahulugan ng word. They must be used and understood imaginatively. So it depends on the person or the writer who uses the different types of figures of speech, and also it depends on the reader or the viewer or the listener who take the information which contain different figures of speech. Okay, so first, let's have the simile and metaphor. So pinagsama natin siya, or we will compare and contrast the two because they're almost the same. Ang magkaiba lang is on how they are used and what are the words that we use to make it appear as a simile or make it appear as a metaphor. So let's start it. Okay, so simile is comparing unlike objects which have something in common through the use of the words like and as. Okay, so ulitin ko, simile is comparing two unlike objects. And we compare them because they have similar characteristics, but we use the words as or like. For example, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Another one, does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrup sweet? Okay, so that is a part of What Happens to Dream Deferred by Langdon Hughes. Okay, so in that poem, they used the simile. Okay, so simile. In here, two unlike things are under comparison through the use of the word like. Okay, so tingnan natin, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Okay, so merong word doon na like. So when you see a sentence or when you read a sentence that uses the word like to compare to unlike objects, then most probably that is a simile. Okay? That is a simile. Another one is the metaphor. So metaphor comes from the Greek word meta and trans, which mean across. For and fur, which mean carry. So carry across. So metaphor treats something as if it were something else. It is a means of comparing things that are essentially unlike. The comparison, however, is implied, unlike simile, that is, the figurative term is substituted for or identified with the literal term. Okay, here's another example. Hope is the things with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. Again, that is an excerpt from Hope is the Things with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. So in here, hope is directly compared to feathers. Okay, so hope is directly compared to feathers. It perches and sings without a tune that never stops. Unlike in the simile, which did not use, or which used like or the word as. Okay, so those are only two differences of simile and metaphor. So the next figure of speech is the onomatopoeia, or sound words, uses words that imitate the sounds associated with objects or actions. Okay, so onomatopoeia, just simply remember, when you hear the word onomatopoeia, it is we consider them as sound words. Okay, example, the chirping of the birds. So onomatopoeia, or sound words, uses words that imitate sounds associated with the objects or actions. So just remember this, onomatopoeia, it has something to do with sounds. Say for example, bang, or tick tock, or meow, ow ow ow, arf, if your aso is social. So those are examples of onomatopoeia. Okay, here is an example. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells, from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. That is an excerpt from the poem Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, so the sound of bells, tinkle, tinkle, or tintinnabulation, or jingling and tinkling are examples of onomatopoeia. Other examples are very common onomatopoeic sounds or words are produced by animals. Say for example, for a snake, hiss, or for the cow or buffalo, we have moo. For cat, we have meow. Okay, and something like that. Okay, the fourth example of our figure of speech is the personification, or on the other hand, it endows human attributes. Okay, so qualities or abilities to inanimate objects or abstractions. Okay, so yung personification naman is you use the attributes or qualities or abilities of human to inanimate objects or abstractions. Okay, example here. "Oh, William, we're weary of weather," said the sunflowers shining with dew. "Our traveling habits have tired us. Can you give us a room with a view?" Okay, so that is an excerpt from the poem "Two Sunflowers Move in the Yellow Room" by William Blake. So in here, in our example, the sunflowers here are given the human ability to speak, as if they can talk with each other. So that is an example of personification. Okay, so for the second part, we will continue with apostrophe and other figures of speech. So watch out for our second video for the figures of speech.